Okay, we are coming to our next guest speaker. It's Michael Fürst. He's the head of CR, Corporate Responsibility, Strategy and Innovation at Novartis. Everybody talks about CR. Novartis is active in these fields since quite a few years. And Michael Fürst will talk to you about the challenges, but also the gains when you really implement the CR strategy as a company.
Merci vielmals. In 1533, the famous explorer and conquistador Cortes, he sailed along the west coast of Americas. And suddenly he saw a landmass on the left side. And he saw a landmass on the right side. And he continued to sail towards north. And that's a pretty big landmass. So he sailed, he had headwind, he didn't make the progress that he wanted to have. So he stopped at a certain point in time. And he reminded a novel that was written around 1510 that said, next to America, there's an island. This island is called California. And that's next to the Garden Eden. So Cortes thought, okay, this landmass on the left is California, and California must be an island. They started to paint maps, and the maps became the common knowledge that California is actually an island. In 1533, Cortes went again. He sailed further up north, and suddenly they found out that California is not an island, it's a peninsula. They went back and said, not an island, it's a peninsula. Only some German cartographers picked this up, and they painted a map in the 16th century which showed California as a peninsula. The interesting thing, although we had all the facts that California is not an island, until the 18th century, most of the maps that you can find showed California being an island. So this is not about facts, this is about mental maps that we are having about the world. And I would like to talk a little bit about the mental map we have in Novartis, about how the world looks like, and about our journey in terms of how we try to change our own mental maps. Think about this here, the art of economic development. You know, I studied in the mid of the 90s. We were one of the few universities that had a chair for business ethics. After my studies, I decided to do my PhD in business ethics. Most people thought, why are you doing that? That's a pretty good trajectory to become a cab driver. But I'm pretty sure the title of this conference would be rather along the lines, the art of destroying shareholder value or something like this. So apparently mental maps are changing. But one thing is for sure, we are not where we need to be when we look at some of the challenges that we are confronted with. Now, these are some of the challenges we see as a global pharmaceutical company. And when you look at it, some of the statistics, some of the facts, they are pretty dire. They are depressing, honestly. When you think about the fact that 400 million people don't have access to essential health services, or 2 billion don't get the access, the medicines that they actually need, that's pretty depressing. But when you think about the fact that hundreds of people have moved out of poverty in the recent years, I think we can also see very interesting progress. The challenge that we have to, I think, successfully tackle as a business community, as the private sector, as a CR community, is to try to change the maps, how we understand those kind of statistics, this kind of data. Think about the fact that we will have more than 9 billion people on the planet. Today it's roughly 7.5, depending on the statistics that you're looking into. We as a company on an annual basis reach roughly 1 billion with our treatments. Now I think there's an inherent moral imperative for us, and I explicitly say a moral imperative for us to reach as many as patients of the 6.5 that we don't reach today. But changing mental maps means also that we see business opportunities in this number. And that's what we are trying to do. That's the journey we are on. Now, how did Novartis look like some years ago? How did we look at the world? We did business in the top income tier of the global income distribution. And we do this pretty successfully, I think. We are a good and a successful company. We have many, many breakthrough therapies brought to the markets over the years, which help to save lives. Now, when we looked at other parts of the global income distribution and patients, the only way we thought about reaching them was to use philanthropy. So we had patient assistance programs, at-cost programs, donations, and we deployed strategic philanthropy. But this whole middle part of the global income segmentation was left out of our own thinking because we had no experience how the markets do actually look like there. We knew that this becomes a pretty difficult exercise to tackle into those markets, so we just left it out. Now, when you see such a world, I think the first thing that you need to answer yourself, what are we responsible for within such a setting? What are the most material issues we believe as a company we should contribute to the global common good? And in 2012, after a long piece of work, right, we started in the mid of the 2000s, we went to our board of directors and said, look, these are the most material areas we believe that we have a responsibility to deliver positive impact on societies. And if we do this well, there is a business opportunity. So the purpose of a pharmaceutical company is to deliver treatments to patients that are needy. And if you do this well, you make good money with that, and not vice versa. That's how I see the purpose of a company. So when we look at materiality and where we want to focus from a SDG perspective, we say the first piece is that we really want to deliver many, many more treatments to patients that are in need within the global income pyramid. We want to control and eliminate diseases. We have a pretty big footprint in the malaria space over the years. We have delivered more than 850 million anti-malarial treatments. We want to pioneer new business approaches. This was the actual proposal that we made to our management team and to the board of directors, because we said, if we are not innovating our business model, we will not be able to go at scale within that middle income bracket of the global income distribution. And what we also understood, in order to do that, we need to adapt our treatments. It's pretty naive to believe that you can take a product that was developed and qualified for, let's say, Western markets and bring it to Sub-Saharan Africa. That's a different climate zone. So you need to adapt the product, or you don't have any clean water. So you need to reformulate your product so that you can actually bring the product to the patient and the patient can swallow it without water, as an example. Or you need a sweet tasting formulation so that children don't spit it out when they get it, but rather drink it and like it. That's all stuff that we proposed in order to be able to really go at scale into that middle income bracket and reach many, many more patients. The second thing, doing business responsibly, is, I believe, something like a primum non nocere, do not harm responsibility that every company has to apply, for sure. And we have considerable issues in that area. There was a question on corruption, but I don't want to talk about governments. We have to do our own homework first. But that's one of the most material issues we need to look into. Now, how does the strategy actually look like that we proposed to our board of directors? So after we have decided why should we engage in that space and what do we want to achieve, the question was, of course, how do we do that? And what we proposed to them is, let's look at the global income distribution as a starting point for our strategic framework. We are at the top, we are at the bottom, but we are nowhere in the middle. So our strategic imperative in order to achieve the goal that we flagged out to reach as many patients as possible is to go into that middle income segment. And in order to do that, we have to reinvent our business model back and forth and come up with new solutions. Some of them will fail, some will work. But if we do it well, there is huge potential from a moral point of view, but also from a business point of view. We got the approval for that in 2012, and since then we are in the phase of implementing this. And it's a very, very difficult thing to do. A very difficult thing to do. As an example, when we speak about patient communities living, let's say, at $2 to $5 a day, we have not a really good idea, to be honest, how the patient journey of such a patient, let's say in Cambodia or another country, looks like. Because that's not our main constituency. This is not where we have a huge heritage in terms of doing business. So understanding what is the ability to pay for a patient, what is the willingness to pay, what is the possibility for a patient to find a medical practitioner close to the village in order to get a diagnosis, which then allows him to get a script, a prescription, that then allows him to get the treatment, is something we really have to discover new, because that's not our normal playing field. So you can imagine what kind of change this requires. This is really about hard stuff. This is about building conflicts into the business that is traditionally running on a margin basis. We are a margin-driven business. What we are talking here when we talk about hundreds of millions of patients is that we go into volume business, which can be perceived as a margin threat, because you dilute margins potentially if you do that. If you go down with the costs, with the price, if you drive huge volumes, there is a margin threat. You have to digest this as a business, and you have to find smart solutions to work with that, because what we don't want to do is to kill the company, for sure not. That's bloody hard stuff that we need to do. But that's what we are trying to do. Now, one of the most important things, I believe, for us was to make clear how this CR story can actually contribute to the strategic priorities of the company. It doesn't make sense if you have a lot of good arguments, but they are perceived as being on the periphery of all the other strategic imperatives of the business. And that's luckily something we have achieved. The second thing is we were able to really build this access model over the years into the scorecards of our senior management, as an example. So we agreed with senior management that every new product that will come to the market has an access strategy. And our executive committee member and our CEO, they have targets related to these kind of things. They have targets related to system strengthening. They have targets related to those 3 bullet points that you see under align access activities and portfolio with global unmet needs. That's a big achievement, because if the senior management team has the right incentives, you can be pretty sure that they will trickle this down through the whole organization, because otherwise it can't be delivered. Access governance was a very important thing for us. We were able to convince the board of directors that we need to have a committee which is dedicated on the topic of corporate responsibility and access to medicines. This is changing the conversation in the company, for sure. And this was an important achievement for us. So these were some important points that are now allowing us to deliver and implement the strategy, the strategic framework that I've shown before. Now, on the strategic framework, just one additional word. I think very often we are too digital and too binary in the way we think about business. You hear a lot of talk about shared value and that this is the only thing, CR is the old stuff, da-da-da. I think that's all nonsense. Companies, and that's the big stretch, have to do all of that. We have to do normal business, we have to do shared value, we have to do at-cost models, and we have to do philanthropy. So that's a portfolio approach that we are deploying. Because I believe there is a moral reason why we want to work in the base of the pyramid. There's a need, there's a cause, there's a purpose to do so. But you can't do this with business models. So what we want to deploy there is philanthropy. So to be very clear, that's a portfolio approach where we are deploying different activities, different instruments, and different models in order to reach as many patients as possible. Now, 2 examples, that are coming from within that strategic framework. One is called Novartis Access. Around 2015-14, we got challenged by our board of directors, and they said, come up with a new business model that allows us to reach more patients, specifically in the area of non-communicable diseases. When you look into the disease statistics, what you see is that classical diseases like cardiovascular, respiratory, diabetes, cancer, that are perceived by many, again, another mental map, as being the diseases of the West, are now hitting developing countries huge scale. They haven't even finished the job on infectious diseases and are now overwhelmed with non-communicable or chronic diseases. And the fiscal burden from a budget perspective for the governments or for the out-of-pocket patient is, of course, terrible because these are chronic diseases. So it's a reoccurring cost that comes all the time. Every month you have to buy your package of cardiovascular treatment, whatever. So the call was, how can we develop a solution to bring treatments to those patients that have a little bit of money but can't afford expensive treatments? So what did we do? We decided that we will package 15 molecules on patent and off patent from the 4 most important non-communicable diseases. I mentioned them before. And we will sell them at the price of $1 per treatment per month to either governments or NGOs. This was the starting point for this business model. We said that we want to go in roughly 30 countries, that we want to take, let's say, 5 years to find out whether this works. And we have now many MOUs signed with governments. We are also seeing that the sole, I would say, avenue going through the governments is maybe not the most promising one. So we are now also trying private sector, because we see that this model can really help a lot of patients to get access to high quality treatments that they need so desperately. So we also said that we want to reach 20 million patients with that program within the given time frame. I can tell you this is a very, very difficult thing to do. As an example, government procurement policies typically don't allow portfolio tenderings. When you have a government tender, they only do itemized tendering. So product by product is tendered out. What we are providing to them is a portfolio. So the regulatory burden to get into an agreement with the government is already quite high. But still, we believe that this is a good offering. When you think about the normal price of an oncological treatment, of a cancer treatment, $1 looks pretty interesting, I think. So what we see now is that this model is a starting point for an engagement and negotiation with the governments. Some buy from them, from the 15 molecules, some buy the portfolio. Some come back and say, could you add some others because we see a local need? So there's a lot of negotiation that starts around that program, which I find beautiful because we are all talking about PPPs, collaboration between private sector and public sector. That's exactly how you can achieve that, by having an open debate what is needed in a country and what we can actually offer on a sustainable basis, because the starting point was that this should not be a philanthropic project. This should be a business model, and actually the person that is managing this program is sitting within the business and he has a P&L. He has a profit and loss statement. And he has a goal to make this at least not loss-making over the years. Another program, it's called Healthy Family, and this dates back to the time when we started to rethink our strategy in the mid of the 2000s. It's called Healthy Families, and we started this in India. You might know C.K. Prahalad. He's the famous author that has written the book, The Fortune at the Base of the Pyramid. He made a presentation to Novartis, and he said, look, you're doing great things in the area of corporate responsibility, but you're missing the trick. Okay, what trick do we miss? He said, you believe poor people are poor people. And they are de facto poor people, but they are also consumers. So why don't you think about coming up with innovative business models, disruptions, with which you can actually reach them? And this was the call for us to really develop a greenfield approach in India, where we said, let's tackle the biggest problems in the rural communities in India. The biggest problems are, on the one hand, that people are not really aware of the diseases that they have. They are also very often not able to reach the next doctor. For instance, women very often are not allowed to go to a doctor alone. So we said, if this is the case, if there's a lack of disease awareness, if there's a lack of health education, and if there's a lack of actually diagnostics in the communities, let's bring this to the villages so that we can save the cost for the villagers to move to the next tier city where they can find that, if they're allowed to do so. So we hired a number of people at the beginning that are doing health education sessions in these rural communities. And to be very clear, this is not about products. They talk about things like hand washing, hygiene, things like that. Very basic health-seeking behavior, proper diet. You know, in countries like Vietnam, where the diet is very salt-heavy, we talk to them about how you can reduce the salt intake so that cardiovascular risks don't develop over time. Now, that's only part of the problem. The second part, and that's a commercial equation, is that we have another workforce, and they're going to the healthcare professionals in those communities, and they're detailing our products. And they do this at the price that is affordable to those rural villages. Now, what have we achieved over time? Our original projections were that we need years to break even with that, if at all. To our own surprise, we broke even after 30 months. And this was really a change in our mental map. Because suddenly people thought, this is not just theory, this is not just some tree huggers in the CR department having some nice dreams about what can be done. This is actually possible. And as a result of that recognition, we scaled this up to 3 countries in the subsequent years. We are now going into more countries. And when you see at the achievements, we have now more than 500 people deployed or working just for this business model. We have more than 50 products that we bring into those rural communities. That's a big achievement. Look at the many people that we have trained, for instance. And unfortunately, I can only show you the numbers since 2010 because we were stupid enough not to measure it from the very beginning, our impact, which is one of the big missing points, I would say, in the whole impact, social impact, innovative finance, impact investment, and corporate responsibility domain. We always believe just because we believe that we do good things, that we have a good impact. That's pretty naive, I would say. This is not how it should work. Therefore, when we started Novartis Access, we said, let's not repeat the same mistake. Let's put a proper monitoring and evaluation program around this access program so that we actually know whether we have a positive impact or not. We are dealing with vulnerable patient groups, so we need to know whether we have a good impact on them or not. And for the first time, at least to my knowledge, a pharmaceutical company has done a randomized control trial design. That's the method that we typically use in order to go through our clinical trials, in order to measure and monitor whether this program is really performing well. Now, the good thing here is this is not done for the purpose of having a nice data point in our annual report or the CR performance report of Novartis. This is management information for the person that is managing this program. And he agreed when he paid the check to this university that is doing the evaluation that this becomes part of his management dashboard. Because he recognized that it would be hilarious to call something a social business model and the only thing you measure is the business part but not the social part. This is not how it should be. And I hope by being totally transparent on that, we are transparent about the raw data, everyone can get access to that, we are transparent about the instruments that are used, we are even publishing the contracts we have with Boston University, that we are creating a common good, which then hopefully lowers the transaction costs for others to start similar things, because we believe that measurement is desperately needed in that space. That's a pretty busy slide, but I still show it, and I know that it's overwhelming to a certain extent, but I still show it to show how complex it is for us to develop a new business model. That's all stuff that we have to consider when we start something like this. It's the whole value chain that is touched of a pharmaceutical company. And you know, when you look at the key resources, you see something marked blue. I'm a strong believer without adjusting, aligning incentives throughout the whole organization, nothing of that will fly. Because I can't believe that a manager that is only measured to increase margins or to make the best possible numbers will be suicidal and start to do that stuff, although it's counterproductive for his target's achievement. Some people will do that, but I'm living in a world where most people are on a Gauss curve, including myself. And people respond to incentives and the right objectives. So that's something we need to get straight. Otherwise, whatever we want, whatever we believe, whatever we hope for will not work in a business context, full stop. That's my firm conviction. Therefore, I think that's a very important part that I wanted to mention. So what I wanted to tell you a little bit is where we were coming from in the company, in Novartis. You know, what was our mental map at the very beginning when we start to look at this new world, and how we try to understand this new world today, and how we try to react to those new dynamics and conditions. And to be very, very clear at the end of this talk, this is not a success story. This is the story about what we are trying to do in a successful fashion. And I can tell you we had a lot of disappointments, we had a lot of failures, but we also have some good success stories. And I think it's worthwhile to talk about that because it can maybe encourage others to do the same. And it can encourage ourselves that we should continue to change our own mental map and be more ambitious, be more driven to reach many, many more patients across the globe with our products that hopefully have a positive impact. So if there are questions, I'm happy to answer those. If time is left, I think so.
Do you think you can expand that model also to mass markets like United States in order to negotiate then with the different payer organizations and the complexity of that market?
Not this model, for sure not.
So it's just for certain countries who can do that, and it's basically the smaller markets.
No, not smaller markets. India is not a small market, right? UP as an example, in UP, in Uttar Pradesh, you have alone 80 million impoverished people. So no, this is not for small markets. I think the important point here is not to think any longer about countries. The strategy that we developed is in principle country agnostic but income specific. Now the answer to your question is, for the United States, the income specific answer will surely be different than in India. But we have to find an answer to that. Yeah. Because there are a lot of poor people in the United States.
Antonio Hautle from Global Compact Network Switzerland. You were speaking about the incentives. That's one of the sensitive parts because our economy is still short-term driven. What was the reaction when you started to implement this and measure the social impact of management decisions? Was there a resistance from management, or was it just decided top-down, or how did that work?
You know, we are in the midst of this conversation. What are the right metrics and indicators that should underlie the scorecard of senior management? And we have done some homework there. That's a difficult debate because I can understand wherever you are within the organizational hierarchy, you don't want to be measured against stuff that is irrelevant or doesn't make a difference or is not robust or rigorously measured. Now, whenever you go, let's say, from output metrics, which are typically relatively easy to depict, into outcomes metrics or even impact metrics, then it becomes a pretty huge effort to do that. But I believe that's the stuff we have to do over time. But my starting point is, let's be pragmatic, let's be reasonable, let's look at output indicators at the very beginning, get experience there, get confidence that this is the right thing, and then move on and go into more ambitious kind of indicators. That's what we have ahead of us, I believe, and that's the conversation we are having internally. So pragmatism, I believe, is needed, but pragmatism that is underlined by a pretty robust thinking, how you can go into the future with that starting point.
Markus Spielmann from Living Guard Technologies. For me, the interesting thing would be to know, how do you do the landscaping? How do you avoid conflicts, as maybe there is from one village to the other a difference of $2? How do you avoid that?
So what we typically don't find is that there is a village of $2 and that there is a village of, let's say, $5. When you go into, let's say, certain geographies, what we try to discover or find is where are clusters of poverty where we can actually deploy this business model, Healthy Family, and this is what we do. Now, of course, when you go to those clusters where poverty is a little bit higher or where you say child and maternal health is a bigger problem, where we could have a positive impact on the communities with our activities and products, then of course, someone else with a higher income would also benefit from that. But at the moment, that's not a big problem internally. And the reason is, when you look at the businesses, I think, of most companies, they are urban-centric, right? The big business is made in the urban centers. The rural areas are totally ignored. So whenever we find a richer patient that could even buy for a more expensive treatment, I'm making this up, all right? There is no threat for cannibalization because our market, our commercial operations are not there anyway. Dependent on the development of this business model, we have to debate what we need to do in order to avoid that. That's for sure. So cannibalization as an example, or leakage, is a constant debate that we have in the company. Now, in order to avoid leakage, what we need to do is to find the right partners in our distribution system so that we can avoid that. Now, the interesting thing is typically we would rely that all this stuff exists, right? When you do this in Switzerland, no problem with that. In Germany, blah, blah, it works. Here we have to start looking into system strengthening activities, which is classically not our accountability. But we need to make a step into this area in order to strengthen the system to an extent that we can make our business model successful without assuming responsibility for that. So what we want to do is a little bit of catalytic activity, bringing the right partners on board so that there is development in the system that we don't have to sustain over time because we couldn't. This would be unsustainable by definition. It's a balance. And we have to, I think we have a business. In the past, it was good to be binary or black and white, and this time is over. We have to be courageous and sometimes make a step and say, let's try this out. We will see whether it works or not.
Thank you very much, Michael. My name is Carsten Rübsam. I'm from Bookbridge, and we bring together talents from companies and talents also from countries like Cambodia to create together worthwhile tangible businesses for this low and middle income sector. And now I have a lot of experience in Cambodia, but also with talents then coming back to companies to try to also, initiate projects like this and change business models. And that's my question also to you. How do you experience this in Novartis now that you've been there a long time? Is there a lot of push you're pushing into the company to kind of develop models like this? Or is there also now, we had the discussion with the millennials this morning, a lot of pull towards you now?
I currently have a job opening in my team, and that's not a job advertisement for this group here, but I want to illustrate something with that. This job opening is now out for some weeks, and the inflow of applications is ridiculous relative to what our staffing teams typically get for similar roles at the similar management level. When I look into the CVs, what I see is that people with pretty senior experiences, having been even senior in franchises, want to make this step down and say, I want to do that because it's innovation, it's purpose-driven. I want to do that, which I believe is a very interesting fact that we see. So yes, there is this shift. We get applications every day from people that want to join this kind of activity. Now, it would be ridiculous to believe that we can absorb that. So what we need to do is to push this out into the business and say, if you are driven by that, if you're an experienced business professional, you're driven by that, we can help you to make experiences through certain platforms that we can create. So you can work, let's say, on a sabbatical basis for a certain period of time on certain business challenges within the Novartis Social Business Group. And then you go back to your business, and all what you have learned is stuff that you bring back into your normal commercial operations. That's the cross-fertilization that we are driving. That's the only sustainable way to do that. Because again, this should not be a CR play. This is CR being a partner of the business to develop innovative solutions to challenges that are really bugging us. So that's the mechanism that we are trying to deploy. And the demand is huge, for sure. It's huge.
Yes. My name is Anton Schwartz. I was on the panel earlier. And beside my hat as a next-gen impact investor, I also started an NGO in Greece called Vuli Watch, which promotes transparency and accountability in politics. And I don't know if any of you know this, but in Greece there's a huge scandal right now with Novartis where it's said that they bribed some politicians, and I don't want to say that they did it. I give them the benefit of the doubt. There might be certain interests behind this, but I wanted to ask you, since you're here as the CSR who's responsible for CSR, to what extent, because you told us all these nice initiatives, to what extent is paying politicians part of your business practices?
Come on. I don't think that I need to answer this, Tony. Really not. What we have in Greece is something that will be figured out, and I hope for a development that will figure it out, right? And I trust in the authorities. We do our own investigations. But do you really believe that I give you an answer to this question?
Well, I try to pressure you.
Sorry. This is not the debate I want to have. And by the way, this is not nice stuff. That's serious. And I get pretty emotional when people start to belittle these kind of things that we are very serious about. And I know, and I mentioned this at the very beginning, that we have problems. I know that. But you are not seriously expecting that I'm answering this question.
Yeah, but you're harming your own reputation by bribing politicians.
Tony, you are saying that we are bribing politicians. At the moment,
are you not? That's the question.
Look, at the moment, at the very beginning, you said you give us the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. Then please do so and don't make these statements.
Well, I give you the benefit of the doubt to make a statement on this.
I will not make a statement on this.
Okay, then this says a lot about your company.
No, that's what you believe. That's what
you
believe.
Give an answer, yes or no.
No, that's what you believe.
Okay.
This is not the debate we should have. I told you very explicitly that we have problems. But that's a different debate. That's a different conversation. And I can tell you something. I knew when I came here that this question will be asked. And I could make my life much easier not going there and being confronted with those kind of questions, right? I still believe that it's worthwhile to talk about it.
Yeah, let's dive in a different ocean now. It's Cristiana Dell'Aira, Living Art Technology. You mentioned about a unique, innovative monitoring and evaluation strategy, and I would like to know more about that if possible.
So maybe I can go back to the slide. So when we started to do this with Boston University, we said we want to understand, based on the objectives that were fleshed out for the program, whether these products really go to the communities where we believe that they should go to. So what we are checking on the one hand is, are the products available in the primary health centers where they should appear? So availability of products is something that we actually check. And the second thing is we want to check whether the prices are right for the patients. Because if the prices would not be right, I think the overall purpose of the program to bring affordable treatments to the patients would not be achieved. So this is stuff that we are looking into. Another thing that we are looking into is we do qualitative research. So we are speaking with the patients and ask them, what kind of products do you have in your household pharmacy? Because if we understand this, we know, for instance, whether there's already a competitive kind of setting where it doesn't make sense, for instance, to bring additional products to those kind of communities. So there's I would say, a quantitative element, and there is a qualitative element of the research study that we are doing. Now, there will be many publications made by Boston University, by Richard Lang, which is the primary investigator of that study, that will hopefully be published soon. So you see a lot of those data points, and we will publish the raw data in roughly, I would say, 4 to 6 weeks, so that you can also have access to that. So as said, that's the main kind of objectives that we are trying to do with that study, and that's the way we try to handle it in terms of giving transparency to other academics, to researchers, etc.
Do you face any resistance from the people due to their beliefs or traditional medicine that they use, especially in some rural areas?
Not really. No, that's not what we see. We see other things that are, I would say, pretty problematic, but not that people typically go to healers or these kind of things. The problem is much more that these are chronic patients and they have problems to get access to capital so that they can do this reoccurring purchase of the medicines over time. And what they do in order to get the money is they sell, for instance, livestock, which is then, of course, a poverty problem for the family, or they go to loan sharks, which then has another negative impact on the income of the household. That's the stuff we see. The kind of healer thing is not what is too common, I would say. Maybe there are bits and pockets, but that's not the big issue.
My name is Peter Ritter. I'm representing Liechtenstein Development Service. I'm interested to know whether the fact that East African patients are suffering from poor quality in medicines and the memorandum of understanding with the Kenyan government did help you to do some quality assurance of medicine in the country, if there is a combination between these two.
I can't relate to that exactly. I can't comment this exactly. But what I would agree with is that quality is an issue in those kind of communities. And that's something we want to overcome with that offering, because we believe that we can provide good quality treatments. The reason, for instance, why we have done this here is to avoid, for instance, counterfeiting, right? What you see here is that we developed a whole new packaging for Novartis Access, including primary and secondary packaging, because what you see, for instance, is that very often people take the pack, they take the blisters out, which bears the originator brand, put it into another pack, and then you have all the problems that are coming along with that. And that's what we try to avoid. So we are aware that counterfeiting is a problem, and we are trying to work on that. It's definitely a concern to us.
I have a question over here.
Yeah.
Christian Zwicky, working for Smiling Gecko, privately also in the pharma industry engaged. One question, you have your company strategy, and I'm sure your competitors have also strategies which might go in a similar direction. How is your collaboration with WHO, with UNICEF, with other organizations who maybe have or want to see different medicine in certain areas? How is your communication there?
I would say with NGOs, it's very diverse. There are some NGOs that actually want to work with us, and there are some that have a different attitude and want to stay at arm's length. So it's a diverse picture, I would say. With UNICEF, for them, we have developed a dispersible treatment form for amoxicillin, and they were procuring this from us. So we are doing NGO tender business, so to say. So we are collaborating with them. With WHO, I would say that it's improving. It's not an easy conversation. They have a different role, they have a different mandate, they have different perspectives than we have on many issues. But what I see is that we are getting into more productive conversations. And again, this is not an accusation that they are the reason or we are the reason. What I see is improvement, which is good. There's a task force or a commission that is purely looking at non-communicable diseases, for instance, led by Sanya Nishtar, which is excellent for this agenda that I was just describing. And I'm pretty hopeful that this will also lead to more dialogue between WHO and the industry.
But is there a possibility to discuss also with competitors about this topic?
We are discussing with competitors. Yeah, we are discussing with competitors. Now, when you think about the fact that diabetes is part of the portfolio, but we don't have insulin in our portfolio, the question, for instance, is can we partner with an insulin company to bring this into the portfolio because it's needed in the communities? That's stuff that we are discussing, and we are very open to discuss.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Michael Fürst, I think we are good with the questions. Thank you very much for that.
This really makes me emotional. That's
Yeah, you can. I'm sure you can sort it out later on.
I had a discussion with him already.
So why don't you continue? Over a cup of coffee. Yeah. We're taking a short break now. Yes, please.
May I add something? I think this comes back also to the discussion we had before about the role of civil society as a dog watch, and the function of civil society is to supervise in governments and companies and to combat corruption. So that's what I missed before in the discussion, and now it's a perfect example. I don't know what is the final result of this investigation, but civil society has a strong role to play.
And has to, media and civil society, and has to have a strong role to play.
And can I please
fully agree.
Strongly agree with that, but that's not the point. The point is how you ask the question. Right? That's the point. I like civil society because it's very helpful. Right? But I think...
Okay, I don't think Mr. Fürst wants to add any to this? Right?